Hey friends, I first heard about Eucontamination from Billie and Paul Hoard maybe a couple of years ago. From my earliest exposure to the concepts they developed, I felt that they had transformative power. I was so excited when I heard that they were going to develop them into a book. Their book is now available, and I'm delighted to report that it's everything I could have hoped for and more. Today, I get to share with you my interview with them. They've already covered a lot of the concepts in the first half of the book on other podcasts. I've linked to a couple of them in the show notes. This conversation with them covers mostly the back half of the book, in which they apply the concepts to various facets of life, both individual and collective. The first half of the book introduces how disgust, both individually and collectively, has often been misapplied by both Christians and the church in an effort to keep them pure from perceived contaminants. Billie and Paul then explore how disgust is rooted in the knowledge that contaminants will change us, but point out that much of the time, that change would actually be good. Finally, they coin the term eucontaminant, a contaminant, but one that brings about positive change. They argue that this can apply to Jesus' work in his time on earth, to the presence of joy of marginalized people in the church, and even those having and listening to this very conversation. I believe that this is an idea that can change how we see ourselves, our neighbors, our communities, our enemies, Jesus, and more. I know it's done that for me. And with that, I'm excited to share my conversation with Billie and Paul Hoard. All right, so today I'm really excited to be able to talk with my dear friend Billie and my not as well-known friend, which I'm sad about, Paul. And they are siblings, and they're both delightful people. And I'm so excited to talk with them about their new book, which I can now show off the printed paper copy here.
There it is.
And Billie's got hers.
I guess if we're all doing it.
Their new book, there we are. Eucontamination, Disgust, Theology, and the Christian Life. I have been beyond excited about this book since I heard that it was happening, and I'm so happy that it's out there in the wild, and I want everybody to read it. So very excited to talk about it today. Why don't each of you just kind of really quickly introduce yourselves? Billie, why don't you go first?
Oh gosh, to Celeste. How do I introduce myself to Celeste? We know each other for too long.
You're introducing yourself to everybody else.
To the audience.
Yeah,
okay.
To the audience.
So I am a trans woman. I'm a lesbian. I'm a Christian. I am an anarchist. I'm a high school teacher. I think I describe myself as like something of an Anabaptist radical in like the official bios I send out to people for the things. And now I am an author and scholar of Disgust. So that's exciting.
And you've newly started adopting the I don't know, title or descriptor Disgust Theologian, I believe.
Yeah, Disgust Theologian.
Yes.
I actually had, it was really sweet. Somebody from Paul's school took me aside at one point after one of our like presentations, and she was like, you really should start calling yourself a theologian. You are, and you just need to own that. So yeah.
True. It's true. And Paul.
Yeah, hello. So I am a mental health counselor. I'm an associate professor. I'm a psychoanalytic psychotherapist. So a lot of my kind of whole world comes around studying kind of various forms of psychology and psychoanalytic theory, and then also the practice. I do have my own private practice, and I see a lot of also people who are getting their clinical license. So I do a fair amount of supervision and consultation on that as well. And now and one of my areas of research is disgust and sort of the psychology of disgust and the way that it plays out theologically, but then also interpersonally and sociologically.
And one of the things I absolutely love about this book is that joining of these two disciplines and two lives around, and both of you have unique perspectives on this, but also unique areas of expertise behind it. And I love how you've brought those two together in this book, and in really a very unique and powerful way. It comes across as like these are actually really relevant to each other and make each other stronger. So I love that in the book. So we are going to dive right in. So I wanted to start with applying this book. There was a situation this week, and I wanted to get y'all's perspective on it. In the UK, as near as we can tell, the facts are a tall woman employee of the department store Marks and Spencer approached a mother and her 14-year-old daughter who had come in to shop in the lingerie department, and the tall woman walked up and asked if they needed any help. J.K. Rowling, among others, are now calling for boycotts. The bridge between these, of course, is the mother has determined, I guess, that the Marks and Spencer employee is trans because she's like 6'2", and there exists no 6'2" cis women, I guess. But according to the official report, that's all the mom went off. So anyway, I thought there was a chance that there might be some disgust at play here, and wanted to hear the two of you's thoughts on this.
Yeah. No, I'm going to go with you. There is some disgust in play here. So yeah, one of the, like, we definitely like play out in the book, and we're drawing from, actually delightfully to me, drawing from Julia Serrano's work on social stigma and how that works. But with what we call the logic of disgust, we combine Serrano's work with some other stuff, and we kind of get together this gestalt of sort of psychological gestalt of the way disgust tends to work in our minds, the way that we reason when we're like on disgust, when disgust is like the primary driving affect for us. And in that context, dose and sensitivity is a driving dynamic, right? So it does not matter how much of the thing that you experience as disgusting, as a contaminant, as stigmatizing. Doesn't matter how much of that thing is there. Any of it at all is enough for you to reject the entire, sort of all of it, all to have this disgust reaction, right? The example that Paul has given quite a few times recently, and I'm going to give this time, right, is that if you have a glass of water, you had a glass of water and I spat into it, right? Relatively small amount relative to your water, but the whole thing is now contaminated, right? It doesn't matter that it's less spit than it was water. And if you reverse the situation so that you, for some unknown reason, were carrying around a glass of my spit, and I obligingly added a little bit of water to it, you would not still drink it. Like, it doesn't work the other way, right? Like, you can't undisgust a thing that way. Right. So dose and sensitivity is the sort of technical term for this thing, that it doesn't matter how much, any little amount you have to get out. Right. So just sort of going off of that description of like the only evidence that they supply that this was a trans woman at all is her height. Right. And yeah, no, like I definitely know women over 6'2", and I have over the course of my life, right? Like cis women over 6'2". Right. So like, it's not even compelling evidence, but it is sufficient indication at a time when transphobia has already is at a peak, right? Like, I mean, my gosh, it's Surf Island, right? Like there's a lot of transphobia going on. It's in the water, it's in the air, it's in the feeling. They're looking for it, right? The disgust reaction has already been activated. Any tiny amount of relative, perceived evidence of transness is sufficient to justify this anti-trans exclusionary backlash. And of course, you're right. Like, behind all of this is the fact that like trans women are just as like legitimate as department store employees as any other person would be, right? Like, this is just true. Even if it is a trans woman, she, as far as I can tell from that story, did nothing wrong, right? Like, so, but also, like, I think it is really well worth noting the role that disgust is playing in taking this, like, really clearly so far insufficient evidence and blowing it all out of proportion, because of course it would, right? Because that is how the logic of disgust works.
Right. Paul?
Yeah, I would just add that it also highlights that reality doesn't matter in that sense. And this is part of the thing. Like, we want to often, at least, tend to live in a world where like reason is important and facts matter, but they don't actually change people's minds. As any argument on social media can show you, right? That's not actually what's happening, because our reasons, right, the reactions, that the things we're telling ourselves are justifications for a disgust reaction we're already having. So when we're disgusted, the first thing that happens is we feel disgust. Second thing that happens is we then tell a story to justify that feeling, to make us feel better, to make sense of it. And so the rationale behind it is, whether the fact that we don't even know much about this individual, that there's no harm being done, that there's nothing wrong even if this individual was a trans woman, that like none of that matters. What's happening is there's a disgust reaction, and then there's a desire to justify it, to rationalize it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one of the more, things that I learned from the book that I didn't really understand before, and I've heard you both talk about it, is that, what you say, pre-rational nature of disgust, of the disgust happens and then the brain comes up with a reason why that was rational that doesn't even really have to make sense, right? It doesn't have to align with facts. It doesn't have to, it's, exactly like Billy's example of the water cups or whatever. It's like, does that really make sense? Like, when you're drinking out of your own water glass, are you really saying there's never any backwash into it? like you're probably still drinking it as long as you don't know that the backwash has happened, right? Like
Exactly.
so it doesn't have to make sense.
And
but
I think
yeah,
there's that famous Seinfeld kind of stand up where he talks about like hair and how hair,
Okay.
when it's on somebody's head, oh, it's lovely, it's beautiful. And then as soon as hair leaves, it's like, oh my goodness, that's so gross, right? Nothing's changed about the hair.
Right.
But now we find it gross. And then we tell ourselves a story that the hair is now gross, but then reattach it to a person is fine again somehow.
Right.
The other side kind of thought experiment again, we'd like talking about spit, is if asking someone to spit in a sterile cup and then drink their own spit. Right. Something magical seems to happen from saliva in your mouth to now it's spit in a cup. We actually call it something else. Yet when you drink anything or eat anything, you're actually consuming your own saliva anyway. You're actually doing it already.
Right.
But
and
now
then
that we
there's
have to see it. Now
and there's kissing, where you take it a whole nother step further.
And that's a whole,
Right?
aspect of it. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And somehow that's okay. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's fascinating seeing the uproar on Twitter, particularly, of course, because like so many of the things are like, somebody's like, hey, this was fine, actually, nothing happened. And the immediate response from people with followers, these aren't little tiny troll accounts with 3 people, will be like, so you support pedophiles? It's like, what? Like, how did that enter into this at all? Let me ask, why is it that the trans woman, assuming she's trans, results in that reaction, whereas a cis man does not? Like, I actually looked it up. Like, cis men can work at Victoria's Secret, and they do. They can't do fittings, and they can't work in the changing rooms. Those are the 2 restrictions, but they can do anything else. That doesn't make news. What's the difference there? Because theoretically, they would argue, like, they would make a lot of the same arguments, like, oh, if this person is working here, they must be a predator, whatever. But for whatever reason, when it's a man, they don't do that. What's the
no, like, because in theory it should be equal, because the objection that like TERFs make, the objection that transphobes make to trans women is like, this is a man, right? Like that's what fundamental is going on there.
That's what they'll say there. That's what they say their rational, their reason is, right?
And I would, Paul's gonna would give a good answer on this one too. Like, actually, the psychology of it is important. But I would point out that, like, think about that hair example that Paul gave, right? There is something especially disturbing to somebody whose disgust reaction is already beginning to be activated. And let's just be very clear that in the UK, as well as in the United States, various anti-trans groups, for reasons that vary from like genuinely felt transphobia to just political opportunism, have been ginning up transphobic feelings and using disgust-based propaganda to do that, right? So there is an existing layer of pre-existing disgust reaction towards transness that doesn't already exist towards men, right? But on top of that, so let's call that. But then on top of that, trans women, we play with their categories, right? We mess with their categories, right? And when something is quite clear what category it should go in, it is particularly upsetting, right? It's that Paul will tell us, and he talks about in the book, about how, disgust is the boundary enforcement mechanism that, among other things, helps us to distinguish between what is me and what is not me. Or in the case of, like, at a social level, what is us and what is not us. What is our group and what is not our group? What are my thoughts and what are not my thoughts? What are my values? What are not my values, right? So at these different levels, but it's the distinction between me and not me. So if you're thinking about specifically TERFs, right? So like feminine, women, basically cis women who are TERFs, there's this sense of trans women as confusing the clear boundary between woman and not woman. And that is particularly disgust. Like that's a well-designed thing to elicit a disgust-based reaction, right? Because it's problematizing any clear sense of, is this person one of us or not one of us, right? Like, so
I see.
The not us are actually safer if they're safer in the TERF mind, if they're easily distinguishable. When they're not easily distinguishable, that's where disgust has more room to play.
Yeah, and you see that in, like, sadly, like, trans panic defense that is, still legal in some states, is, somebody finds out somebody is trans, that their data is trans, and then they murder them. And in some states, that is still a viable defense for murder, is I was so shocked that they were whatever. But I've heard trans people say that if you're not going to be able to go stealth, make sure that you're upfront about being trans so that it's not a surprise, right? That being surprisingly trans is actually more dangerous than being trans to begin with. So, Paul, you had more thoughts on?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna, the part I was going to add is that particularly disgust comes in the face of ambiguity, in particular, not just in that delineation between there. And so it's particularly things that are ambiguous, like, is this my spit? Is this my hair? Is this me or not me? It's that those ambiguous things that tend to elicit that disgust because it helps bring clarity in the face of that ambiguity.
Interesting.
And I want to be careful that, like, disgust is not a bad thing. What's negative is then how we respond and, like, how we then interact with our sense of disgust and what we do with the object that we're experiencing as disgusting. And that's what, like with every emotion, right? That you want to notice it's happening so that you can then respond in a way that's going to be helpful, that's going to help move towards thriving, that's going to be kind of appropriate, that's going to be more mature. You can put whatever word we want towards, like, what do we do with it? Like, consider courage, right? Is not the absence of fear, but is choosing to respond despite one's fear in a way that's going to be best for that situation, right? That's wisdom, that's courage. That's what we do with our emotions. And I think we want to encourage the same thing with disgust. I think a negative thing of our research, I want to be careful people don't hear, is to say, like, oh, if you experience disgust, that's bad. Actually, if you experience disgust, that's human.
Right.
It's what do you do with your disgust? With that natural reaction, your body is having a reaction, your psyche is having a response. We want to listen to that instead of pretend it's not happening. And then what we do is we act as if that disgust is a perfect reflection of reality, as if the thing I'm disgusted by actually is disgusting. And this is one of those like things we like to turn around. If you're disgusted, that has much more to do with you than it does with the object of disgust. I mean, it's the same thing because two people can find things. One of us can find something disgusting, the other doesn't. It's not the object. It's actually us who are having the reaction that says more about.
That's really good. You guys know so much. It's amazing. And yeah, I love that thinking of exactly like the disgust isn't necessarily bad, right? Disgust prevents us from getting food poisoning a lot of the time, right? But also if we have a, overdeveloped disgust mechanism or a twitchy disgust mechanism that's responding to things that it doesn't need to, then that can do harm. Okay, cool. So the back half of the book I want to jump to, once you've introduced these topics of contamination, disgust, and eucontamination, you move into the back half of the book where you go off of Jesus's famous, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and you take your eucontamination lens on each of those three, which is great. And then in each of those, you talk about both how that works individually and collectively, which is amazing because they are sometimes overlap, but also have some really interesting ways that it manifests, not only as this personal disgust reaction, but like a group trying to enforce its boundaries and things like that. So the first thing I wanted to ask is, in the book, Jesus is recorded as saying the way, the truth, and life. In the book, you guys went with the truth, the life, and the way. So you did a little bit of a switch. I don't think that was an accident. And I don't think you guys are unfamiliar or using a translation that I don't know of. So where did that come from? Why that particular choice?
So I'll say, this is going to be an uninteresting answer in terms of like, I do think the order is like theologically neutral. I don't think Jesus is doing something really important with like laying it out that way. And for us, we thought that progression worked really well for the kind of concepts that we wanted to develop in the book, right? So for us, it was important to start with the truth as eucontaminative, right? As eucontaminating, the truth as the thing, as something that comes in and at that mental level, right? Just the head level disrupts the way that we understand the world, understand reality, and think about reality, right? And we wanted that concept established because we thought it was important to understand that before we move on to life and we talk about what it means to live a life that is open to being like eucontaminated by the truth, but also by others and by, from all of these different sources. But we'd already established by then, having given the reader a couple of good chapters to get their head around, what do we mean by, and what does this eucontamination look like at this kind of heady conceptual level? Not in terms of the theory, we do that in the first 3 chapters, but in terms of like getting a sense of what does it look like when the truth is the thing that is eucontaminating you. Right. And then that led us to the way as a way to end it, to cap it off, because moving from like a life that is Eucontaminated to like, so what does it mean to live? Like it's that sort of how do we live then in light of all of this? And so that kind of, it seemed like a natural progression in just in terms of like readership and building up a kind of growing understanding. So, sort of this is, it's a good example, truth is this really strong, we thought, example of how Eucontamination can work in a positive way and understanding how Eucontamination, what it looks like, right? Then life is this, like, here's what a life would be. This is what it means for our life. And then the way is like, so then how do we, that kind of ethical, moral, how do we do the practical? How do we move forward with this? And then we summarized it, all that in chapter.
Of course. Yeah, I love it. Paul, anything to add?
Yeah, I know. I just, I think some of it's like being teachers. I get nervous if I start with the so what, people are going to skip the rest. And so, and I think there's a way that the way could be read as like, okay, so this is what I do. And I think if you jump to that, you've missed the whole point, because we give some ideas and we wanted to be practical, but it really has to come out of an entire life lived in a particular, with a particular posture. And so starting with, I think what for many people reading a book is experience near, which is truth. We're talking about propositions, and we're kind of, the book itself is more a little bit theoretical and in the mind. And so starting with where the readers are at and then moving them towards actually what does this look like lived out was kind of part of the formational journey we wanted people to go through, which is part of why we did then truth, life, and way. Some of it in the way I was conceiving even more of the psychology side of what we were doing was sort of thinking of truth as thoughts and life as feelings, and way as we're getting behaviors. We think about thoughts, feelings, behaviors as sort of the realms of mental health. And oftentimes we'll start with with somebody's thoughts and tell me what you're thinking. And then if we jump to behaviors too quickly, we end up repeating the same symptoms because we haven't dealt with more of what's underlying, what else is going on. Two people can do the same things, but if they do them for totally different reasons, they have completely different impacts, psychologically, sociologically. So we wanted to kind of lay the foundation before we got to the so what.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense. I like it. I thought it flowed very nicely in the book. So really helped me kind of, particularly putting the truth first, really helped me get grounded and feel like, okay, I feel like I get a sense of where we're going here and get some of those basic concepts.
I think there was also, saying that about concepts, I think there was also just a dynamic to which we thought we really wanted to introduce the whole bullshit thing.
Yes.
The whole concept of bullshit needed to be introduced early on so that it could then be, because we come by, it sort of sticks around as a kind of term of art that we're using throughout the rest of the book. And we needed truth. Truth is where you introduce that concept.
Right. Yeah. And it's a super good concept of, yeah. Why don't you talk about that one? I see Paul jumping at that. So,
no, yeah, I get excited.
Go ahead and introduce that concept if you want.
Yeah, so we use the term bullshit, and we actually kind of contrast it with poetry, which that was a part that I had a lot of fun playing with Billie on that. And actually, when I shout out to our younger brother, Sam, it was at a Frank Turner concert that we were sitting there and I was talking about the book. He's like, actually, what about poetry? And so then that was some of his infection in the book, which was fun to sort of bring in more of our siblings in here. But so the idea of bullshit comes from Harry Frankfurt's little book on bullshit, which is a terrific little book. I mean, it's tiny. It's basically one essay if you haven't read it. But he sort of presents this theory of bullshit as essentially bullshit is more about creating an impression on other people. And so it has no relationship necessarily with truth. So a bullshitter says things because they're trying to make you feel a certain way or get you to do something, creating an impression. And sometimes the things they'll say are factual, and sometimes the things they'll say are not factual. Importantly, they don't care about whether they're factual or not. Their entire focus is on what's the impact it's going to have on somebody. Whereas the liar actually has to pay lip service to truth in their attempt to deceive. And so in that sense, Frankfurt argues that bullshit is a bigger threat to truth than deceit.
Right.
Because deceit at least cares.
Yeah, because they don't actually care. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, if I can just I think I've been mulling over just in our contemporary political discourse the way that this plays out, right? I think most people who understand the Frankfurt's concept of bullshit would largely probably agree that the current president is a phenomenal bullshitter. Like that bullshit is like his MO in the way he deals it. And if people have been sort of struggling with what's going on and how how this moment is different, or the last 10 years have been different from what came before, right? Up until sort of this era, politicians who got called out by the media were called out on the basis of fact checking, right? And fact checking is built around the presumption of a truth, falsehood, true lie dichotomy, right? The idea is that, politicians don't want to get caught in saying an untruth because the presumption across the board is that, the politicians should be speaking the truth. And
Right.
so when politicians were called out by fact checkers, the response, again, up until Trump, was generally along the lines of, no, your fact checking of me is itself incorrect. Here's why the thing I said was actually true, right? And it's an
Right.
argument over truth is what would sort of ensue, whether they were lying or
Right.
not, right? Whereas what we notice with Trump is that he never doesn't much bother with it. In fact, what he usually does is just attack whoever's fact checking him as sort of trying to, as being against him, right? And I think the way that we should read that, like that sense of how dare you are against me if you are fact checking me, is the sense of I am labeling you as somebody who is trying to construct a competing reality to the reality I am trying to construct with my language. Because again, bullshit is just a way of trying to get people to experience reality in the way that you want them to do it, whether you use facts or not, right? And so so if you fact check Trump, you're just making yourself his enemy in the realm of bullshit.
Interesting.
Because he doesn't care what's true. He just cares about whose vision of reality is going to win out in colonizing the minds of whoever it is.
And I even imagine he doesn't, and again, speculating here, haven't met the person individually, but when someone is that practiced and that steeped and that formed in bullshit, my suspicion is they can't imagine other people not being bullshitters. So it's just competing bullshit is what's happening. And so a fidelity to truth over your bullshit is unheard of in his world, right? That it's all bullshit. It's all impression. It's all what's the impact. And so whether my crowd size was this big or not, it's not about how many people were actually there. It's not like 40, 50, 10. It's about the impression that I'm loved. And you're either helping me with the impression that I'm loved, or you're giving me a competing narrative that I'm not loved. And so now we're just fighting over impressions.
Right.
Truth itself has disappeared. And that's why, like, calling Trump a liar, I think, actually misses the whole point. Because that presumes a purposeful deception. And sometimes he'll stumble into facts, and sometimes he stumbles out of them. And because importantly, it has nothing to do with it. And to bring us back to the book for a minute, because I know it's easy to get caught up in politics, I mentioned poetry because I think it's really interesting. If you think of, like, bullshit masquerades as truth,
right?
Yet covers it over, yet hides it. Poetry, on the other hand, actually presents itself as fiction, right? You don't read a poem thinking this is going to tell me the scientific details of something. So it takes on the guise of fiction.
Unless you're a young earth creationist.
We'll put that aside for a second. Then you're denying its poetry, essentially, is what you're doing.
Right. Yeah.
But what poetry does is overtly take on the guise of fiction to point to a truth beyond data. It points to a truth beyond, like what is the truth of a poem is such a great question to wrestle with, right? Because it's pointing to something beautiful. That's what art does, points to a truth, but its fidelity is to a truth that is so much more than fact. And what I love about putting those two together is that the form of poetry can be used as propaganda for bullshit.
Right.
And we see that in all sorts of things. And so poetry is powerful, but when it's art, it points to a truth beyond itself that disturbs it, that haunts it, is some of the best language I think Billy and I have been able to find on that.
Yeah.
And whereas when it's on the side of bullshit, it affirms and it clarifies and it feels good.
Mm.
It leads you towards certainty and clarity in bullshit, and it haunts and disturbs, not necessarily always overwhelming, but like I have to keep sitting with this. Like there's something uncertain and exciting and opening when it's on the side of art.
And I found while we were writing, I was sort of just kind of doing my own self sort of analysis while we were writing, that like writing about that, and I'm 100% on board with Paul, co-author, right? But while I was writing that, I found myself having this sort of reaction where I was like, wait, does this mean that everything that makes me feel more comfortable is wrong? And I had to remind myself, no, because bullshit doesn't care about truth and falsehood, right? So just because a proposed fact or, like learning something, we have those like, oh my gosh, this clarifies it all and it makes so much more sense for me. And what we try to say in the book is that is a dangerous moment, but not that is, therefore, thing is false. It's just, therefore, be aware, because this is not, this could be bullshit. It could also just be fact, right? And facts are what facts are.
Right.
But it means that we do have to be a lot more careful in challenging our own thoughts and in interrogating our thoughts.
Right. Yeah. No, that's really good. I'm just thinking when Hillary was running and she gave her story about like she was like disembarking this plane under fire, had to run heads down and everything, and then somebody found the video of it And she's literally just walking off the plane and like talking to kids and things. It was absolutely hilarious in its falsity and played a key role in her ultimately losing that primary. Then you go forward to like 2016 and you see, Trump obviously has a campaign of bullshit. He comes in, and starts doing the thing with crowd sizes. You see your first hints of the media just not know how to deal with it because they're all doing the fact checking thing. And The Dark Knight Returns has this scene where Catwoman and Batman are fighting on this rooftop. The bad guy has sent their hench people after her, and she's like,
"Stay back! I'm not bluffing."
And Batman tells her,
"They know. They just don't care."
They know. They just don't care, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wish that I could go back and tell all those media fact checkers at that time of like, Trump knows. He just doesn't care.
And this gets to some of what we were trying to get to in both, I think, the individual and collective chapters, so 4 and 5 in the book, right? Is this sense that what I think people miss and what is becoming more evident now is that we have a tendency to crave bullshit, right? I think the way that we talk about it in the book is that bullshit is a lot of what we use. It's a lot of the material that we use to protect our reality, our false realities that we experience, right? Like all of us are building up an imagined reality that we live in. It's the way we think the world is, right? And a lot of that building up is done with bullshit. Bullshit that we accept, especially, it's our own bullshit, and then we're using it to reinforce that, right? So what that means is at the political level is it means that people are really receptive to bullshit that helps them reinforce, helps them experience the world in the way that they already want to or already do. Whereas facts which challenge the truth, which challenges it, whether it's recently I've been thinking more and more about the way that comedy can also play in the role that Paul was talking about with poetry. And I think there are some other sort of genres, but any of these genres or modes of communication that reach beyond themselves, where the real point or the sting or the power of them is not so much in the words as behind the words, where the words are haunted by it, I think is where you have this dynamic. But all of that is much more resisted when the truth that it communicates, the truth that it carries, would force us to deconstruct and then reconstruct our worlds. We're always reconstructing our imaginary worlds, right? But we don't want to have to deconstruct them and reconstruct them. It is a painful and unpleasant process. So I think what I would say the media was not ready for in that moment, just to stick with our current example, right, was the fact that people were inclined to not care about the fact so long as the bullshit was bullshit that helped them to pad out their imagined reality, that helped them to keep protecting their imagined reality. Whereas for the rest of us, right, like I didn't like Trump back then, back in the crowd size day, right? Like at that time, for me, it was this jarring, what I didn't know how to handle was what is happening to truth, right? Like what does it even mean to have the official White House spokesperson flagrantly, blatantly, and obviously and embarrassingly fact-checkably contradicting the truth, contradicting fact.
Right. And clearly not care. Right. Yeah. No. Paul?
No, I was going to say, I think the other way we talk about it in the book is like we buy our own bullshit first. And I think that's this idea that like it's important. The epistemic humility to recognize we are all drawn towards things that affirm our way of living in the world. And I think there's just a humility to recognize, I'm going to be drawn towards that. One of the kind of basic premises of psychoanalysis is that desire comes before information. Like when you learn something, you already have an opinion about it, right? Your personality, your personhood is already there, making meaning of it and fitting it into your world before the information ever got in. In the words of Simon and Garfunkel, a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. That like some part of us hears before the conscious part of us that thinks it's being rational. And if we're not open, if we're not humble enough to recognize, hey, there's a part of me doing that filtering, and I need help to understand that filter. I need community. I need other people to help me see that part of me. If we're not open to that humility, then we're going to just double down farther and farther and farther into that bullshit. And it's going to feel good because it's going to affirm us. It's going to be comforting. It's going to be soothing those like scary thoughts at night. It's going to be helping us feel who we are. So we're all drawn towards this. But this is why we argue for the importance of community, of having other people. And if you've ever been in a conversation with someone and you thought, can you not hear yourself? The answer is no, they cannot. You
Right.
both are here learning more about me than I intend, which is both terrifying and beautiful. It's part of what helps us connect with each other and part of why we need to keep talking, because it's each other that helps us see our bullshit when we're able to have that kind of relationship.
Right.
Whereas Disgust doubles down on it.
I wanted to ask about the Superman movie that just came out and some of the reactions to it.
I have to admit, I haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
So just have to acknowledge that.
I'm going to try and be mostly spoiler free on things that matter or whatever. In the movie, there is a conflict between two countries, one of whom is very powerful, has a big military. The other is very poor, has sticks, and things like that. And there is this conflict, and Superman is trying to prevent this invasion by the powerful country into the country with sticks, and it's going to, they're going to kill lots of people and things like that, and Superman's on their side, on the side of the poor country with sticks. And the countries are not named Israel and Palestine, right? But the people who are very pro-Israel absolutely got very upset at this movie, right? Even though it didn't name Israel, even though it would, like, and what you were saying about, like, sometimes when the poetry hits on a truth that we don't like, that's what's going on there, is that they can tell, wait, this is about this thing. Or at least makes me think that, because when you're watching the Superman movie, like, you can't not root for Superman in that. Like, if you're watching that and you're like, oh my gosh, I hate that Superman is doing, he's the villain of this film, right? That'd be ridiculous. Is that what's going on there?
So, Billy, if you don't mind, I'll jump in with something, and then if there's something more, I mean, let you add that, because there's a thing that I think comes up, which is this whole idea of shooting the messenger. Attack the film, because the film is showing something about my world that I don't want to see, that I don't want to have to face. And you're defending bullshit when you are more concerned with the signal, the one that's telling you something's off, being the thing that needs to be destroyed, as opposed to actually dealing with what's wrong. There's this great TED Talk, I think Kathleen Schultz put out, where she talked about on being wrong, where she asked this question, what's it feel like to be wrong? And, most people, it's embarrassing, it's shameful, I don't like it. And then she has this beautiful twist where she says, actually, that's what it feels like to find out you're wrong. We feel that when we find out. So what do we resist? What do we defend against? The messenger. We resist against anything that would tell us we're wrong, tell us we're doing something wrong, tell us this is bullshit. So what does that speak to, that reaction? It means something about that film is speaking a truth to them, like they're making the connection. But instead of changing their view about Israel-Palestine, instead of wrestling with what that might say about them, instead of wrestling with anything about that, they want to destroy the film. The film shouldn't make me feel that. As if the film, the messenger, is the one creating that reality, as opposed to pointing to a reality. So there's this differentiation of what's the sign and what's reality.
Sorry, I had to unmute. The only thing I would add to that, because I'm right with Paul. But the only thing I would add to that is that I think looking at, I've seen some of the same reactions that you've seen, Celeste, and the reactions don't feature any sort of argument that the larger industrialized country was right or anything like that, right? There's no sort of reasoned argument. In fact, the argument is this is, and they usually say woke because that's their current catch-all term for like things we don't like or side we don't like or cultural overall oeuvre that we have a problem with, right? And again, which is a classic disgust maneuver, right? Because it's saying like thing bad, therefore ejectable. Right. This is just in the category of things that are bad. So there's no attempt to engage the concept, the what is there behind the thing, right? The thing behind the thing. There's no attempt to engage with that. The attempt is simply this has to be got rid of, right? In fact, I would argue that like 90%, if I'm just going to pull a number out of my butt, but like 90% of the critiques from the right of this Superman movie essentially come down to a critique that this is a vehicle to make us experience the world in a way that we don't want to experience the world. And it is a dangerous vehicle to us because we generally like Superman, right? Like, so we like the shape of the vehicle. And so we are warning people, and I guess warning people that this is a Trojan horse for experiencing the world in a way that will upset you. So therefore it's bad. Like none of that actually adds up to it's bad. In fact, I would argue that that should add up to this is quite compelling and should be engaged in, like we should sit there with this and allow it to bother us. Like this is actually a pretty core part of the truth chapters in our book, is that when we encounter things that feel that way, that you think there is something in here that I find very compelling, but also something that I find disturbing, that's an invitation to growth, right? That is an invitation to let's wrestle with that. Let's sit with it. Let's see what in me is reacting that way. It's not always truth, right? But it is an invitation to wrestle and to grow by engaging the part of ourselves that is upset or that is discomforted by.
Because I'm sorry to keep jumping in, but because of course truth is more
This is
complicated.
great. We may not make it all the way through the book, but
Yeah,
this is fantastic.
Well, because truth is obviously more complicated. If truth suddenly becomes simple, straightforward, certain, clear, it's not truth anymore. Truth haunts beyond that. It's more than we can imagine. We try to get ourselves inside a world of truth that is bigger than us, as opposed to try to get truth into this little bite-sized thing I can hold on to. And so if we've reduced truth to something that makes me feel better, it's not truth anymore. It's in service of something else. And I think, so to point out what Billy's saying, truth, you're closer to truth when you're holding uncertainty and tension, or what Ecclesiastes calls vexation, right? You're closer to truth then than you are when you think you figured it out. Once you've settled, once you've resolved the contradiction, what you've done is you've been able to smear enough bullshit over to make it feel good to put it away.
Okay. I'm on this is the right medium. I'm going to jump in. We're going to keep pushing on this one because Celeste, you're going to like this.
Okay.
Come back and do this later.
This is fantastic. I love it.
No, so okay, but you're gonna like this example, right? So this is the thing, right? This is a lot of what's happening behind the perennial "what is a woman" question, right? Because every time that anti-trans people ask that question, they love to ask it as a gotcha question, right? The presumption, the smug, sort of smarminess of that question is built around the expectation that the answer, that the truth is something that is small, compact, and will fit in their hand, that it is not wild, that it is not complicated, that it is not messy, right? And every time they try to offer their definition, they always leave out people that they think actually ought to be included, right? This is the sort of standard, to let people behind the scenes here a little bit, right? The easy thing to do when somebody asks that question is always just to flip it around and say, do you have a definition? And inevitably, their definition is going to leave out people they think ought to be included, and even potentially include people that they think ought to be excluded, because the truth is bigger than us. We have tried to make these categories. We live in the world, we try to make categories, and we hope that our categories contain truth, which is a ridiculous hope, because reality is bigger and pre-exists all definitions.
Right. Okay. I love it. And now I'm going to share an XKCD comic. Are you guys both familiar with XKCD?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. For those who are watching who are not familiar with it, congratulations, you're about to be familiar with XKCD, and it's wonderful. It's a very nerdy web comic. And a while back, very long time ago, Randall Munroe, the artist, did this absolutely wonderful one that I think about a lot. Fields arranged by purity. So it has a sociologist on the far left, and then standing next to them is psychologists who say sociology is just applied psychology. Then the biologist says psychology is just applied biology. The chemist says biology is just applied chemistry. Physicist says, which is just applied physics. It's nice to be on top. And then way over on the right, you have mathematicians who say, oh, hey, I didn't see you guys all the way over there. What you're talking about makes me think about this of 1 + 1 = 2 is true. And I don't know if there's a whole lot of deep meaning you can pull from it, right? Then we can move on to physics and okay, a hydrogen atom is a proton and electron most of the time. But then as we keep going, right, we get to things okay, I am 6'2". That's a measurement using some human unit, but we're applying it correctly. So that's true. I have also been, and more since I transitioned, I have been called tall. Now we're not really in the realm of things that are capital T true anymore, right? That's a very subjective label. So question for you guys. A, do I understand you correctly when you're talking about this? But B, when you're talking about what is a woman, and part of the problem is that it's just not that simple, right? We're trying to label something that has a complex reality under it. And labels are imperfect. But I love what you guys are talking about in the book. And if you can say a little bit more about it. When you talked about words are almost always never actually fully representative of the thing. They can't, right? They are symbols. They talk about a thing, but you can't actually have it be the thing.
So There's a lot there. I would actually, so I'm going to take Randall and I'm going to problematize him as part of my answer to you, right?
Do it.
So use your example of like, so the mathematician, the first time I saw that image, and I saw it years ago, I think when it first came out, right? My immediate thought was like, yeah, and then sort of floating up into the right as a philosopher who's just laughing about all of this, right? Because here's the thing, right? Like even your baseline example, which is the standard example for math, right? Like 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, so explain to me why there isn't actually just one. Why is 1 + 1? 1 + 1 isn't an option until we start taking reality and subdividing it into categories. There is no +1 to just isness. There's isness. And we have to divide that up into like the isness that is me and the isness that is you and the isness, right? Like we have to divide that up into parts. We are already constructing reality as soon as we start trying to experience it, right? So even the mathematician, who I would agree is factually describing, right? Like how the relationship that multiple things have in combination, right? Like it can be, we've made these categories and these categories have these associations and there's these rules and that applies and it will consistently and predictably apply every time we try to do it. That's all fine, right? But all of that is sitting on top of our established process of making meaning out of just reality, right? And this is a lot of where Paul's work on Lacan comes in to our book, right? Is that what is real, and that capital R real, is behind everything else that we use to make up the reality, both the way that those categories are and the way that those categories relate to each other. Behind that, there is always more that is left over that is not yet described. And there is something in us that resonates with that. There is something in us that bumps up against that real, that more that is behind the categories and the relationships those categories have to each other that we use to describe our world. And we can either just deny that's there, which essentially puts us in the position of creating our own worlds and living in them in a way that means that actually we're going to have trouble engaging with anybody else ever. Or we can accept that reality is bigger than ourselves. The reality is bigger than our minds are able, than the categories that we as a species are ever going to be able to come up with. And I'm a fan of improving our categories. Like, I'm one of those people, I like to irritate my students. I'm an English teacher. I've been a history teacher, but I like to irritate my students with things like the existence of the platypus, who just makes our categories not work well, right? Like, and obviously there's something trans to that, but like, you have this being who just defies the categories and it doesn't care. It's just out there doing its thing. Like there's nothing fundamentally subversive in the attitude of a platypus. I don't know if platypoi even have attitudes, right? Like the platypus isn't out there trying to like screw with your categories of reality. The platypus is just there laying eggs and then like giving milk to its young and making like biologists all over the world uncomfortable. That's not why they're doing it. They just are reality because our categories are categories that we make to try to define and think about and understand reality. And this actually does like double all the way back to disgust coming back in, because disgust is the mechanism that is there helping to make those categories feel discrete, even when they're not, even when in fact the line between me and you is blurry, right? Like as a result of this conversation, you're different, I'm different. We have been infecting each other, and anybody who's watching or listening to this has also been changed by this. Right. So all of those spaces, all of the boundaries that delineate between me and not me are blurry, and that is uncomfortable. And so disgust helps us pretend that they are not blurry, pretend that those boundaries are not fuzzy, which is fine a lot of the time. In fact, it's necessary sometimes. And of course, as we get into in the book, there are also a lot of times where it becomes a problem.
For sure.
Paul, your turn.
I have a lot of thoughts and places to go, but I don't know that we need to go there quite yet, other than to say yes. Well, just to kind of affirm where Billy was going from, like my discipline and sort of psychoanalytic theory, Lacan argues like the fact that we're using language itself has to be taken into account. Like the mathematician is using language, the philosopher is using language. We can't not be using language. And in fact, language is what sort of inhabits us and has an impact on it. And when we say a word, we're both bringing that thing into existence in some ways, like kind of like bring that. We're also negating it by saying Paul, you're saying the word Paul and not me, who I am. So you're both kind of bringing me, but you're also negating me. So language itself is this really fascinating thing that needs to be taken into account when we're talking about truth. And this gets all kind of, ivory tower abstract, like real fast, other than to say that, of course, there's more Like there's things that we can't, there's more to the world. There's more that we can't speak. Part of why I get back to poetry, because what draws me to poetry is how poetry breaks language. Poetry takes the definitions of words, the way grammar is supposed to work, and then messes with it in a way to say more than those words are capable of saying.
Right.
Poetry is the perfect example of like the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, because it's points to something beyond it, and you can't capture, like the movie Dead Poet Society. You can't come in and be like, well, this is what a poem means, and here's how it is, and here's how we can measure it, because you've lost so much of what that poem, the truth that points to. It's something more. There's something beyond. And I think if there's anything, I hope our book is sort of this invitation to see that as something really exciting and expansive and beautiful, as opposed to something terrifying and threatening, because it will disturb your worlds. It does mean like the way we think of the world is fundamentally wrong, but it also invites us into this kind of playful, but what if there's more happening? Like, absolutely, 1 + 1 is 2. And what if there's more happening? What if the way we've decided on ones and pluses and twos, what if there's more going on? And I think, to those people who find that exciting, who can get to that being this like expansive, beautiful place, hopefully our book will be a nice encouragement in that sense. And to those who aren't, hopefully it's a way for people to kind of be curious about why that's so threatening. What's so scary about the possibility of there being more, the possibility that we can't comprehend everything, that there's always going to be more. So we end the book with Lewis's last battle, and this idea of come further up, come further in, and this sort of vision of heaven as continually expanding. And there's always more. It's not something you capture. It's always more.
So on those notes, it feels like this is one of those classic, like, I don't know, the term I've always heard for it is, the map is not the territory, right? The words are not the things, right? Is that, all maps, all words are, to borrow from my discipline, computer science, lossy compression, right? We're making something into a word, but the word can never actually fully represent the thing. You can't go from the word thing. Hank Green just did a great video on like, what are fish? But then the other thing that this made me think of was there's a lot of conversations, and Billie, I know you've seen this, even within the trans community, and definitely about the trans community, of like what words to use, right? How do we describe ourselves, right? I've seen debates over, is non-binary the right thing? Because then you're defining non-binary people by what they aren't instead of what they are, right? Is that the right label here? I've had lots of discussions on, is transgender even the right term, right? Is that even or is gender transition the right thing? I haven't changed my gender. My gender has always been woman or girl, right? So I haven't changed my gender. My gender just isn't what people were expecting it to be. So transgender, okay, my gender is different than what people thought. Okay, there's an acrossness there. But gender transition is a phrase that feels weird, but I don't have a better one. And so there's a lot of this of like, we get stuck on these words and people have big feelings about these words. But it's one of these where like it's messy because the language wasn't necessarily developed with us in mind, right? It didn't come around with us in mind. So anyway,
and
thoughts on that?
Like we talk about in the book is that like all identity labels fail, right? Like every person, it doesn't matter who you are, all the identity, and if you sat through the kinds of like sort of contemporary, back when DEI was still allowed, right? The sort of contemporary, like, hey, let's think about some of these things, workshops that people would do. One of the things they would often have people do is you'd write down all your different identities so that you can see that you have identities, because it's useful for people to like recognize they have them at all. And that's great. But all of those, every single one of those.
See Lily Alexander's video on yellow that just came out yesterday. It's incredible. I will link it. It's amazing.
Please do. So like everybody has these identities, and whatever a person would have written down on their sheet of paper, they fail to actually perfectly match any one of those. And in fact, when we really interrogate each of those, they're all fuzzy boundaried. They all have, this is not, it works most of the time. It's not perfect. It's not great. But it is useful. What's that? The famous phrase, I keep quoting it. All right. Is that all models are wrong, but some are useful. Right. And it really is all models are wrong. Like in my classroom, I have a little sign that just says taxonomy is not reality.
I love it. I love it.
All of our categories aren't quite right. And so we have this mildly antagonistic relationship to them. And sometimes it can be a deeply antagonistic relationship. And sometimes it can be an unreflective relationship to them. And I would actually argue that a playfully antagonistic tension is probably the healthiest, right? Is to know this is the category I use. It is the most useful one available to me at this time. And the terms of that category, the way it functions in society might shift. And that might mean that there's a time when it won't work for me very well. Or I might find out things about myself that mean that this category doesn't work for me very well. All of that can happen. I might be part of making the socially functional definition of that category expand or contract, or there's a lot of different things that can happen around that. And it is not untrue to say that like politics and power and all sorts of other social dynamics come into play, which makes the whole thing fraught, right? A lot of what Paul and I are trying to do in the book is actually decrease some of the tension around this play. We really want to encourage an attitude of play and of curiosity and of engagement with all of this, and to experience this as something where there can be some liberation and some joy. But that's not to obscure the fact that people write laws and they use guns to enforce those laws. And when they write those laws, they use these categories, right? And so whether or not you are included and the ways in which you're included and the ways in which the people with guns who will enforce things are going to feel about your place in different categories is going to have an impact on the way your life works. Right. So we're not trying to ignore any of that. In fact, we would argue that those are things that should be surfaced and brought to light. And so I'm also not trying to say that these are not fraught dynamics, but I am going to say that I think our society would be a lot healthier if we could, to some extent, move past our hang up over getting our identity labels just right and just accept that all of our identity labels come with fuzzy boundaries and that we are taking them as the best language for right now and the best categories for right now, with an openness, with an open-palmed willingness for all of that to be renegotiated as necessary. And that's not the end of the world. It's not, we need structures for building our reality that are less fragile, in the sense that if you pull a part out and replace it with another part, the whole thing doesn't feel like a catastrophe. It feels like growth and it feels like joy.
Right. I like it. I'm imagining that all identity labels should always have a little tilde in front of them for approximate. Right. Okay, that gave me a good springboard onto one thing that you all talk about in the book, and this is where I want to wrap up for the day, because I really wanted to hear you guys talk more about this. One of the things that you describe in the book is this, the power of a contaminant or eucontaminant, right, is that it will change the thing that it is contaminating, right? And one of, I think, the most powerful or eye-opening things for me was recognizing that, my friend who sent me all the different reasons that I'm not trans, and then when they couldn't convince me that I wasn't trans, they just stopped talking to me, right? Because they recognize that to accept me will change a ton of their life, right? They will lose their church community overnight, right? Or they will have to become somebody who desperately tries to change their church community, right? And they'll probably run out of town on a rail on that. But like, the thing that you guys said was like, those people, they're not wrong that allowing me into their life will change them, right? The church that is, all are welcome here, but we're definitely not going to ever pass the mic to the person who might challenge us in some way, right? All are welcome here, but our pastor is a cishet white guy, right? That sort of thing. So anyway, but I just wanted to hear you guys talk more about this, like the people who are afraid, who are having this reaction, they're not wrong that it will change them. They're wrong about that being good or bad, right? I guess, let me ask this. What advice on that, knowing that they are correct, right? What advice would you give that person, right? In terms of, and I think this will be a good place to drop off for the day, is what advice would you give that person who recognizes that there is some truth, some person, some concept, whatever it is, that's trying to get into their life, and they're like, wait, but if I take that into my life, things are going to change. How would you approach that person? What would you tell them? Ooh.
Well, it is a good therapy question, but actually my mind first
It's also a good theological question. We can go both ways, right? Yeah.
My mind went to Lewis and this question of, is Aslan good or tame. And of course, Austin's not tame. The truth, other people, the world, it won't leave you the same. Thank goodness. You're going to be changed. And I think where I go to is in what is your ultimate trust in? What is the sense of security you're holding on to that tells you have to resist that, as opposed to a sense of trust in something that no matter how you're changed, you're holding on to something more powerful, something more beautiful. And theologically, part of what we highlight is that if you're afraid that the world, that sinners, whatever category you have, are going to contaminate you, that means you live in a world where sin is more powerful than love, than the Holy Spirit, than God, however than righteousness. And that, I would argue, is a pretty terrible form of blasphemy. That makes no sense of Jesus entering the world and contaminating it with love. And so I would say, where is your trust? It may be the question that I ask you to just sit with. Like, what is it you're trusting in? What's the security you're holding on to that is requiring this defensive protection, even expulsion and objectification of other people? When particularly if you claim to follow in the way of Jesus, the command is to love the other, not to objectify them. And that if instead of being curious about why they're disgusting, I come back to, why do you feel the need to label them disgusting? Why? What is that doing for you? And that's maybe the therapy question of like, let's bring it back into questions of trust and questions of how is that functioning for you?
Mm-hmm. And at risk of going a few minutes over, you just gave me the perfect segue into a particular clip of Skye Jitani and David French talking on the Holy Post podcast last week that I really wanted to drop in. I'll just play. It's about a minute or so.
The very existence of opposing views and the expression of opposing views is in many times seen as inherently injurious because, the existence of so I'm right, you're all wrong. And what's the value in your expression? What's the value in your liberty when your liberty can only result in maybe people being dragged to hell, right? And so there's so much certainty around and so much blazing certainty that you look at dissent and platforming those who disagree as inherently injurious. So this is something, I grew up in a much more fundamentalist tradition, and you just saw that kind of thinking all of the time.
But doesn't that betray the fragility of your own belief? That the mere existence or presence of somebody who disagrees with you is injurious. That means your faith in that idea is not very strong or secure.
Yep.
Go ahead, Billy.
No, there is a whole, because I know they've had some issues with trans folks, right? But, and this is the thing is, it is can you hear this yourself? Because they're right? Like the idea that just the experience of this type of person is going to contaminate or destroy your faith is an indication that you feel you see your faith as more fragile than this thing that you have identified, that you have called sinful. Whether you were right or wrong about that, I would certainly suggest that they are wrong in seeing queer people as sinful, right? And yet, what ends up happening is that we are powerful. I just come back to, we are powerful because we are going to shatter the way they've constructed reality. They have, in fact, constructed these very fragile realities that can't handle, for instance, the humanity of a trans person, that can't handle the reality of the love between two women or two men, right? Like their reality can't handle that fact, though, that truth. And therefore, they're not wrong to experience it as a threat to their imagined reality, to experience disgust, because if it comes in, it is a eucontaminant that will shatter that fragile reality. What they miss is that it also represents, therefore, an opportunity to build up a more robust reality. With what is left when their reality has been shattered, their fragile reality has been shattered, the parts and the pieces that are left are the building blocks of a stronger, more robust, more loving, and more encompassing reality.
So good. Paul, any last words?
I just want to give shout out to amen to Billy on that one, that I think, just if you can accept that our realities are never fully true, then we should be looking for ways to expand them, to push past them, to find better ways. I mean, this is what, the apophatic tradition of always finding the least worst way to talk about God, for example, because there's no right way. There's continually finding less worse ways to do it, less worse ways to talk about ourselves, to describe our reality. That is a beautiful, exciting, life-giving way to approach the world. And I think I just go back to even like on a psychological level, a fragile world of fear and protection is deadly. Like is life's draining, whereas like being open to experiencing more, interacting with other people, not living in this fearful kind of disgust ridden, how do I keep all the bad things out, but instead being curious about how delicious and strange the world can be is, I mean, on a personal level, is far more life-giving.
I love it. And I think, yeah, you see it in the gospel. You see what Jesus did. You see what, the apostles in the book of Acts, etc., is this constant widening, right? Who have we not included yet, right? It's one of the reasons it drives me insane when I hear people say, well, how long is the LGBTQIA2S plus acronym going to get? How many colors are we going to add to our pride flags? And the answer is always more, right? Because it's who have we not included yet? Who have we not loved yet? Right. And so I think that's a really good call of like, why are we afraid of going beyond where we have gone yet? Because that's always where we need to go. This is really good, both of you. Billy, you went off mute. Do you want a last word there?
No, I'm good. I'm going to let my last one sit as the last thing I said.
Okay. All right. It was great. So, all right. This was wonderful. We will have to do a part 2 because there's more we didn't get to, but that's okay with me because I love talking to both of you. So anyway, thank you all. I will flash the book again, Eucontamination, available from your publisher. I will put the link in the bio. Also available on certain large online bookstores. Also, there's Kindle now. There is a Kindle copy available. I just picked that up this week, so I have a digital copy that I can search through and everything. So anyway, everybody go buy the book. It's great. It's fantastic. I can't say how enriching all of this thinking has been in my life and the way it has changed how I've seen myself, how I've seen other people, how I've seen life, how I've seen the Bible and seen Jesus. And so, but this book has been such a blessing to me, and I know it's going to be a blessing to so many other people. So thank you both for all of the work. I know years of work went into this. Thank you so much. Everybody go check it out, and we will do a part 2 soon. So thank you both, Billy and Paul.